A very good morning to each one of you. On behalf of Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, we welcome you all for this session on BRSR, bringing transparency in business sustainability. The session is addressed by Mr. Abhinav Prasad, who is the Director, Consulting Climate Change and ESG, Deloitte Touch Tomatsu India. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation to address our members. The session is organized under the aegis of ESG Expert Committee of the Chamber, chaired by Mr. B.R. Vishwas, who is the Managing Director of Vishwas Construction Industries, and co-chaired by Mr. Rajesh Kumar Jha, Country Environment and Sustainability Manager, ABB India Limited. The Chamber acknowledges the support of our member organization who have sponsored all the events of the Chamber for the year. Bueller, Fundermax, MTR, IAMPL, SDMIMD, Sona Group of Companies, TVS Motor, Vishwas Group, and Wipro Limited. Thank you very much for joining for this session once again. And I now hand over the platform to Mr. Rajesh Jha to take it over from here. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So good morning, everyone. And on behalf of BCIC, I again welcome you again for this particular webinar, which is on the BRSR, which is bringing transparency in business sustainability. In fact, in today's session, we are going to understand more about business responsibility and sustainability reporting, how this as a part of compliance or as a part of ESG performance that we need to adopt, and how this particular disclosure is not just to have a just basic requirement of a compliance, but how it will be helping us to improve our ESG performance overall. So I think we all are aware the BRSR has been a mandate by SEBI, in fact, and currently it's applicable for top 1,000 listed entities by market capitalization. This reporting, of course, will be done as an applicability from the 22-23 as a mandatory part, in fact, which will be replacing our existing BRR reporting system. And this particular transparent disclosure through BRSR will serve as a single comprehensive source of non-financial sustainability information, in fact, for all the relevant business stakeholders, be a regulator or any investors, any public at large, in fact. Thus, this particular session is going to help all of us, in fact, to enhance our awareness and, of course, understand much deeper about the overall this particular BRSR. And of course, with this, we have our chairman, Mr. Vishwas, who is leading the ESG group. And of course, we have the distinguished speaker, Mr. Abhinav Prasad. So with this background now, I request Mr. Vishwas for the opening speech, and then we'll move to our speaker to, of course, take this entire session forward. Yeah. Over to you, Mr. Vishwas.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of BCIC, I welcome you again for today's session on BRSR, bringing transparency in business sustainability. As we are aware that every organization is working towards bringing sustainability in their process and operational needs to also focus on the transparent disclosure. The BRSR provides a comprehensive framework to provide an overview of a company's economic, environmental, and social impacts caused by its business process. BRSR is expected to be used as a single source for disclosing sustainability-related information in India and serve as a base document for various stakeholders, mainly investors, to bring about compatibility among companies. As the sustainability disclosures have become the need of the hour, the information provided by the companies will be used by credit rating agencies as well as financial institutions to assess the credibility of a company or a business. Thus, BRSR reporting has become very vital in current business scenario where every industry needs to adopt the same in more systematic manner to achieve sustainability. Thank you, Rajesh. The stage is yours now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vishwas. So now again, I'll welcome our distinguished speaker, Mr. Abhinav Prasad. So I'll just give a small background of Mr. Abhinav, who is, of course, working as a director in ESG and climate change group in Deloitte, and having more than 14 years of experience in this particular field. And he has worked in the area of corporate sustainability, the ESG, climate change, with multiple corporate across sectors, and of course, multilateral and bilateral funding agency, as well as central ministers. He has also worked with public and private sector companies in the field of ESG strategy preparation, as well as reporting. And some of the major tasks what he handled was related to the market assessment of green building finance in India for the World Bank. Of course, besides, he also had a advisory support of the climate change initiative to BE, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and Ministry of Power. So with this background, now I request Mr. Abhinav to take this session forward, and of course to make this session more interactive, and of course more learning overall for all the audience. In fact, yeah. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Prasad. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you, Mr. Vishwas. So, good morning, everyone, and I'm happy to be here in this very important topic. Let me share the presentation, and then we can start. Yeah. I hope this screen is visible.
Yes, please.
Okay. So let me just take you through the contents of today's presentation. First, we'll talk about evolution of sustainability and ESG reporting globally as well as in India. The second part of the presentation is the advantages of BRSR, not only as Mr. Rajesh was mentioning, it's not only a compliance requirement, but there's a lot of value to be derived when you're ensuring transparent reporting for your organization based on a framework. Then we'll talk about specifically about the BRSR framework, how it is different from the earlier version of BRR, and overall understanding of the key structure of the BRSR. Then we'll talk about a little detail about what each of the structures of the BRSR framework entails. Then we'll also try to map BRSR with ESG pillars and SDG goals, right? And then we'll also try to map what are the key different functions within an organization and which principles of the reporting is by and large map to which function, so that all the functions are kind of have to be involved to ensure a full compliance reporting. So we'll try to map and see which functions are mapped against which principles of the reporting. And then in general, how then companies can take a, start a journey in terms of reporting, and what are the key next steps in terms of once you have established a system for reporting for your organizations. Now I'll take a step back and just give a key brief overview of the key elements under ESG, right? So E stands for environment, S for social, and G for governance. So it was believed, and it was over the years, it is felt that ESG is not only a good thing to do, a moral imperative, it's because it's also a business imperative. And the reason why is we say that is the investors now believe that among all the others risks in an investment in a company, ESG performance level of any company is also a key consideration when their investment decisions are concerned. So what you see on this slide are the key KPIs that are important from an ESG perspective. Under environment, you have waste and circularity, waste, all kinds of waste. And then energy consumption is a key environmental consideration, and the key matrices to track your energy for your organization in terms of energy intensity, savings. And then most important part, that environment, in fact, under entire ESG is greenhouse gas emissions and climate change risks, right? So this is one of the most material issues under ESG. So much so that in some of the articles, you would see ESG and climate change used interchangeably, right? So this is a very, very important KPI for all sectors, for all companies, to a different degrees. It's important, but yeah, it is important nonetheless. Then you have water and other environmental compliances, targets, what are your strategies for reducing the environmental footprint? So those are all covered under environment. Social is also equally important. Health and safety, labor practices, child labor, human rights, not only within the organization, but also in the supply chain. So that is the expectation. that your sustainability is not limited to the four walls, but it extends to all your suppliers, all your vendors, all your business associates. And these things are important from a social perspective. Diversity, inclusion, human rights, all of that are very, very important. Now, coming to the third pillar of governance. Governance is also important, both from a risk management and risk identification perspective, whether the existing governance structure includes or integrates the ESG aspect into its discussion and decision making. What are the key committees related to ESG that takes care of the ESG issues and also resolution and also communication within the organization up to the board level? So that's very important. Then compliance management, business, responsible business conduct and practices, all of that are very important. Anti-corruption, all of that forms into governance pillar. Now, I just wanted to give a flavor of what all it entails. And let's take a look at how ESG framework globally has evolved over the years, and globally, the need was felt quite early. If you see 1997, the event of ExxonMobil oil spill, people started to feel that it's important to disclose the environmental responsible principles that exist within an organization. Otherwise, organization might go away in terms of damaging the environment and still doing the business. So it's very important to disclose the environmental principles that are resting within an organization. So GRI was established somewhere after that, with the increased focus on the environmental reporting. And in 2000, so GRI is one of the oldest reporting frameworks as far as sustainability framework is concerned. And that CDP was kind of established in 2000. CDP focuses on disclosure of very specific few indicators related to carbon and climate risk related aspects. And it, in a way, gives assessment of the performance of organization from a climate perspective. Then in 2007, Climate Disclosure Standards Board was founded by the World Economic Forum, essentially giving focus on natural capital and financial capital both, right? And then in 2011, 2010, in fact, IIRC was kind of established, International Integrated Reporting Council. Essentially, they came out with a framework for reporting the sustainability of organization under 6 capital, natural capital, financial capital, social capital, human capital, intellectual capital, all of that. In 2011, another framework was, kind of formed, and this is called Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And this essentially is investors driven. So GRI was doing well until this time. Even after that, it is doing well even until today. But some of the investors feel that we need not a very comprehensive, full-fledged, framework for all organization, but we also need sector-specific indicators because they have a limited time, so they'll focus on only that has a very high impact on the investment. So 77 sector-specific standards were also kind of formed under SASB, right? And every sector, the material issues were also identified. We'll talk about material issues in the coming slides. And then it was felt that there is a lot of overlap between these global standards for sustainability reporting. And they felt that there's a need to merge. So now Valley Reporting Foundation has actually created a merger of SASB and IIRC. So SASB's elements will be integrated with the integrated reporting framework. And then further up, CDSB, and there's a merger of CDSB and VRF. So what we're doing is we are seeing a convergence. We're seeing a convergence of all of these, so that the reporting standards globally that is being followed is standardized, and stakeholders who are reading these ESG reports of any organization get to see comparable information, right? And the idea is also to bring the non-financial reporting at par with the uh, financial reporting, system. That's the end objective. Because until now, what was believed that only bottom line was important, but now it is established fact that triple bottom line is important. So we need to have a accounting system and reporting system at par with financial accounting system. So that's the objective, because when you see the maturity and credibility of and also acceptance of the financial accounting system, it is quite high compared to the present system for the non-financial indicators. But the objective is to bring them at par, right? Now let us take a look and see what has been the evolution of sustainability reporting journey in India. So in 2009-11, Ministry of Corporate Affairs came out with national voluntary guidelines. Essentially, they took key elements of many of the frameworks, many of the bodies that were doing a lot on sustainability, and a very comprehensive guidelines, voluntary guidelines were formed, and companies were asked to use this to report. In 2012, SEBI came out with a mandate for 100 listed companies to start reporting on what was then called, on still until this year will be used, is called Business Responsibility Report, essentially based on national voluntary guidelines. In 2014, CSR law was enacted, and CSR spend was made mandatory. In 2015, the list of 100 was extended to 500 companies to report on the BRSR framework, right? And in 2019, this list was further extended to top 1,000 listed companies. And in the meanwhile, even Bombay Stock Exchange also suggested and came out with a circular that some of the reporting framework should be adopted by the listed companies. SEBI, in fact, advised companies to use the integrated reporting framework on voluntary basis, of course. But now, what they've done is in 2020, Ministry of Corporate Affairs came out with a very comprehensive framework for ESG reporting, which is quite different, quite comprehensive compared to the earlier framework that was BRR, which was relatively less comprehensive in terms of capturing all the ESG information. So the present mandate is for FY23 reporting. Companies, the top listed companies, 1,000 listed companies have to use the BRSR. And if you see the outlook and in the future, the plan of SEBI is to extend to all the listed companies, and even all the unlisted companies can use it essentially, right? So that investors get a very comparable and authentic data. Once the framework is firmed up, so the assessment of the performance by investors will be also consistent. So that's the overall objective, because listed companies have an obligation to disclose their ESG performance to their investors. So that was on the background on how it evolved. Let me also, as I mentioned, that it's not only a compliance requirement, it also has few value, that can be achieved, that can be, gained by organization if they follow any of the ESG frameworks, and also particularly the BRSR framework. So increased value creation. A lot of global studies have suggested that companies who are into ESG performance reporting as well as ESG strategies, they tend to gain larger brand valuation in the market. Increased access to capital. When you perform well under ESG and when you disclose also in a credible fashion, Then obviously, in case you want to access capital, so if everything remains the same, if an investor has to compare two companies, they'll also see the ESG performance index, right? And there are many rating agencies that do this job in terms of rating different organization under ESG performance or ESG risk. So a company has lesser ESG risk, obviously their cost of capital will be also more. And vice versa in terms of companies who have a good ESG rating or low ESG risk, the cost of capital will be lesser. So because it's an investment risk, the financial it also leads to reduction in the financial risk if you have a formed up plan for the future in terms of all the key parameters and environment, social, and governance. If you're lacking in one area, and if you disclose that your management has some plan to improve it going forward, then obviously it tends to also reduce your risk on the long term. Then access to market, increase market share, obtaining social license to operate, and also retraining and attracting talent, because as you are aware that the citizens are also getting completely aware and aligned with the environmental concerns. So a company who has sound ESG reporting system and disclosure in the public domain, obviously not greenwashing, but genuinely, if you report well, you also tend to attract not only your investors and regulators, but also talent as well. Okay, so now coming to the framework itself. So BRSR has broadly three components: Section A, then Section B, and then Section C. Section A is on general disclosures. Section B is on policies and processes. And Section C essentially has 9 principles, and under each of the 9 principles, you have certain KPIs to report on. And the KPIs itself under each of the 9 principles under Section C are split under essential indicators and leadership indicators, right? A quick difference between how is BRSR different from BRR. So initially, in a way, in terms of comprehensiveness, I think BRSR is more comprehensive. Then in terms of the value chain partners, one of the key differences is BRSR is now expected to, is asking companies to report also on the supply chain partners, not only about your own company, but also supply chain partners. So there are a lot of difference in terms of the extent and depth to which the information is required. So that's key difference. Also in terms of some of the specific points like life cycle assessment, for example, under one of the environmental pillars and principles, companies are expected to do life cycle analysis and disclose the information related to a footprint in each of the product or services life cycle. These were actually not there in BRR at all. So a lot of qualitative disclosures were required, whereas in BRSR, specific indicators, and in fact, they have also given tables for how to report the values, not only present, but also the historical data for 2-3 years, so that we can able to disclose a trend in those performances. So that was a quick snapshot in terms of the difference between BRR and BRSR. A little deeper into what the structure of BRSR reporting entails. It has Section A, as I mentioned, and it has 24 areas to report on. Section B has management, disclosure and processes and policies, and it has 11 areas. And Section C has total 139 information points that needs to be reported. And as I mentioned earlier, it has Section C has 2 splits under each of the 9 principles, and the split is essential indicators. Those are mandatory to be reported for all companies. And if you're not able to report, you need to disclose there itself why you're not able to report and what is your future plan to report that. So that's a compliance requirement. Leadership, on the other hand, it's not mandatory, but obviously something good to have and is a best practice in terms of reporting. So very high granular level data is expected under leadership indicators. That differentiates actually between general reporters and very progressive reporters. So if you are also reporting on leadership indicators, which means that your systems are already in an advanced stage in terms of reporting credibly. So they have given specific indicators under leadership indicators also. Now, if you consider the 9 principles for reporting, so the first principle is on ethics, transparency, and accountability. And the second is on sustainable and safe goods and services. The third is on well-being of employees and those in the supply chain. You remember I had mentioned that your own employees and the workers in the supply chain. So the responsibility extends beyond the 4 walls. And the 4 is on stakeholder interests and responsiveness. And the 5th is on human rights. 6th is on environment. Very, very detailed in terms of KPIs, number of KPIs to be reported is a pretty significant one. Then principle 7 is on responsible and transparent advocacy. And then principle 8 is on inclusive growth and equitable development. And principle 9 is on responsible customer engagement, right? So, so I'd mentioned about how to increase the credibility of what a report in the public domain. So in one of the indicators, BRSR framework also asks, are these data third-party verified and assured, right? So that information is not mandatory that you have to do it, but you have to certainly report whether you have done a third-party assurance of the data that you have reported or not. So assurance or verification itself is not mandatory, but reporting on whether you are doing or not is. And if you see, consider what are the standards for getting your report assured. So traditionally, as I'd mentioned, GRI is one of the older frameworks. So many companies had started reporting early, in the 2011, 2010 itself using the GRI framework. And they're still using, some of them are still using it. So what they generally do to gain more credibility in the disclosures, they get third party assured, and the standards use are ISA 3000, AA 1000, ISA 3410 specific for greenhouse gas emissions. So these are the assurance standards that generally third-party assurers kind of adopt to report any non-financial indicators of any company, right? So just the definition wise of these 9 principles, what we see is principle 1 is on business should conduct. It's a little prescriptive also. Business should conduct and govern themselves with integrity and in a manner that is ethical, transparent, and accountable. And principle 2 essentially is on businesses should provide goods and services in a manner that is sustainable and safe. And principle 3 on businesses should respect and promote the well-being of all employees, including those in their value chains. And principle 4 is on businesses should respect the interest of and be responsive to all its stakeholders. So stakeholder mapping is essentially in one of the section B itself. How have we defined the stakeholders and what are the key external and internal stakeholders that you consider? So all of that is also important. And principle 5 is on businesses should respect and promote human rights. And principle 6 on businesses should respect and make efforts to protect and restore the environment. And principle 7, businesses when engaging in influencing public and regulatory policy should do so in a manner that is responsible and transparent. Principle 8 is on businesses should promote inclusive growth and equitable development. And principle 9, businesses should engage with and provide value to their customers in a responsible manner. So let us now go a little deeper into each of the sections. And after the presentation, Nance will also take you through some of the reports that are available in public domain, and we'll see how those companies have reported under each of the reporting structure. So what is required here is details of the business activities, products and services offered, details of employees, workers. So workers essentially contract workers, turnover rate, representations of women and differently able across each level uh, and of the organization, management level, workers level, top leadership, all of that. Details of holdings, subsidiaries, JVs, and associates. Then grievance redressal mechanism for stakeholders, not only internal stakeholders, but also for external stakeholders. Then identified sustainability issues and materiality topics. If any of you have experience of reporting under GRI, a very important section is on doing a materiality assessment exercise, essentially to identify what are the, among all the plethora of ESG topics, are all the topics important to me to be reported or focus on equally, or there is some kind of differentiation I can do. So if yes, how do I do that, right? So what you do essentially is take views and feedback about the impact that those issues will have on your organization and also on the stakeholders. And then you rate them. And on a relative scale, you plot it and see where it is lying in terms of its importance. So that's essentially to prioritize your material topics, important topics, right? Because you may not be able to have in terms of action points on each of the items equally. Maybe you will have a plan. So that's the reason why it's important to see based on impacts, what are the key topics, right? So that's an important takeaway from this slide. That in the general disclosure, you have to disclose your material topics, right? Under management and process disclosure, what we have is information about the company's policy. Under each of the 9 principles, what are the policies and the processes and the frameworks that the organization has? Essentially, it is in yes or no. Do you have it or not? And also, it is expected to disclose whether you have made those policies public or not. So that's another question that companies have to answer. So process and policies under the 9 principles is the key takeaway here. So it gives a good opportunity for companies to internally check whether I have all the policies that is expected from an external stakeholders perspective, whether it's a rating agency or a compliance requirement like BRSR, right? And if not, then companies have to start developing those policies. And unless a policy and process is in place, you'll not be able to take action on those KPIs under ESG, right? So that's the reason why the a complete section on disclosure related to management processes policies is dedicated in this section. Because unless you have a policy, you'll not have a process and framework in place to take interventions, right? So that's the objective in terms of the policies expectation. Yeah. So now coming to the section C, right? Essentially, section C is on businesses should conduct and govern themselves with integrity in a manner that is ethical, transparent, and accountable. Then this indicator gives also a framework for reporting in terms of violation, fines, all of that is expected. details of the anti-corruption policies, etc. The control mechanism that is there with the companies, coverage of trainings as far as anti-corruption is considered. What are the level of training that has been imparted to each levels of organization, you know, then issues related to conflict of interest. What are the processes in place to avoid conflict of interest? Has there been any incidents of conflict of interest in the past? Uh, all of that is expected, in this particular principle. Uh, you know, uh, so these are essential key takeaways from principle one. In terms of principle two, I can also take you through when we go through one of the reports by one of the companies who have put out in the public domain. So for 2 years, this framework BRSR was put out for companies to report on a voluntary basis. Now, next year reporting, as soon as companies come out with a report in FY23 around April, May, June, they have to do it mandatorily. So many progressive companies have already started reporting and not use the earlier BRR framework. They've started using the BRS, and we'll go through some of the examples and see how they're reporting. Right. The principle two is on business should provide goods and services in a manner that is sustainable and safe. It's about goods and services. Procedure for sustainable sourcing, EPR plans, EPR essentially extended producer responsibility. Then details of life cycle assessment of products if conducted. If you remember, I had mentioned earlier, one of the key differences in BRSR reporting is the life cycle assessment that is expected for the products that you're producing. And then processes in place to reclaim products for recycle, reuse, and safe disposal and end of life, right? So essentially what is also an expectation is how do you integrate the ESG screening when you're selecting your suppliers. As I had mentioned, what you also need to ensure is that ESG performance is also there with your suppliers. So what kind of framework you're using to screen your suppliers is also an expectation, in this particular section. Principle three, quickly. It is essentially on business should respect and promote the well-being of employees, including those in their value chain. Again, value chain, you have to focus that they have included the value chain. So measures for well-being of employees, the key trainings, then benefits that are given to employees in terms of insurance, maternity benefits, paternity benefits, all of that is important to be reported in this framework. Then process and procedures for health and safety management, rehabilitation, for certain groups of, employee that is required. So in terms of how do you ensure that skill upgradation is happening, within the organization? So that's the key expectation here, and also some of the practices to ensure that the workplace itself is safe and suitable for all employees, all categories of employees, with adequate provisions for grievance redressal mechanism, not only for employees but all categories of stakeholders, whether it's your clients or suppliers, because the key essence and genesis of this principle is that sometimes more often an issue which is initially smaller, and if not properly addressed at the right time, starts to snowball into a larger issue. So we have many examples, in recent past, that any human-related issues that become a very big for issues in an organization from a workers' welfare perspective. So the idea is to have grievance redressal mechanism, structure and practices in place to avoid those eventualities. Principle 4 is on should respect the interest of and be responsive to all its stakeholders. Governance structure should ensure that business acknowledges and assumes responsibility and is transparent about the impact of their policies, decision, products, and associated operations. Business should enable stakeholders to benefit fairly from value generated to the business. Process for identification of key stakeholders, key stakeholder group identification, including marginalized and vulnerable groups. Process of consultation with each stakeholder groups. So what I've given here is essentially the key expectation. With the key expectation, what is also clearly given in under each of the principle is a table in which format you have to kind of report, and we'll have a look when we see a couple of BRSR report of companies. Principle 5 is on businesses should respect and promote human rights. Business should ensure that all individuals and groups whose human rights are impacted by them have access to a grievance. The governance structure should ensure that the issues, where it is coming from, what are the corrective actions that have been taken, and what is the impact of such events on the businesses. So training is an important part of this indicator. Training on human rights to different levels of employees, to different suppliers, also vendors, suppliers who are working with you. So that's also an expectation in terms of human rights. Then details of remuneration is also expected. Then disclosure on compliance related to human rights, if there is any violation that has been there, some of the penalties, etc. That has been charged to the company. And that is expected to be reported, penalties as well. Some of the litigations, all of that also needs to be reported. So this is on business should respect and make efforts to protect and restore the environment. This is particularly for the environmental pillar. And it's a pretty comprehensive one on energy, water, waste, not only energy, but energy intensity, not only greenhouse gas emissions, but greenhouse gas intensity. So if it's a service sector company, maybe total greenhouse gas emissions per employee will also be a measure that needs to be reported. Another measure of greenhouse gas emission intensity would be greenhouse gas emission per value created, just to compare two organizations. Because of the extent, the actual magnitude sometimes doesn't give a true picture of the emissions of organizations. So to normalize that, emission intensity is also expected in this particular principle. Then your water consumption, your waste generation, if it's a manufacturing company, then what is the compliance level in terms of zero liquid discharge? That is, expected to be reported. What is the percentage of, waste that you recycle, reuse, all of that? How much is going to the dump? All those kinds of information is expected. Then specifically related to climate change also, following the greenhouse gas emissions. What are your key strategies for emission reduction? So initiatives, etc., is something that can be reported here. Yeah. Principle 7 is essentially on businesses, when engaging in influencing public and regulatory policy, should do so in a responsible and transparent manner. The governance structure should ensure that advocacy positions are consistent with the principles contained in the guidelines. Businesses should, to the extent possible, undertake policy advocacy through trade and industry chambers and associations and other similar collective platforms. Businesses should ensure that policy advocacy positions promote fair competition and respect for human rights. So essentially, disclosures on associations and trade industry associations. Public policy, what is the role of your organization in shaping the public policy? Do you have any public advocacy platform within your organization to do that? What are the key other initiatives that you take related to public policy? So all of that is expected to be reported here. Principle 8 essentially on promote inclusive growth and equitable development. Essentially social impact assessment done for projects and its outcome. So all the social related CSR programs all get captured in this particular principle. Then details of supply chain partners belonging to MSMEs and small producers, are your sourcing, etc., in a way that you also support local businesses. All of that is important, and it's to be reported under this pillar. So it requires to promote inclusive growth and equitable development in the value chain, essentially. What is your social capital? So essentially it's a measure of your social capital, not only in terms of CSR, but also in terms of ensuring that there is sustainable development happens in and around your business operations as well. You support the ecosystem, the socio-economic ecosystem there. And the principle 9 is on essentially on business should engage with and provide value to the consumers in a responsible manner. Essentially, disclosure of information about the products to consumers with respect to environmental social impact it may cause. So that kind of information is also expected. Then details of consumer complaints in handling, then channels and platform where information about products is accessible to consumer in a transparent manner. So essentially to not greenwash, but provide a credible and true information to the customers is the expectation here. Yeah. As I'd mentioned that all the 9 principle has overlaps with the expectation from sustainability development goal, SDG goals. And if you see principle 1, it has mapping with the goal 16 and goal 17. Goal 16 and 17 is just a second. Goal 16 and 17 are on peace, justice, and strong institution, while 17 is a partnership for the goals to achieve the goals in a holistic manner. Similarly, other principles, for example, principle 2 has a lot of alignment with goal 2, goal 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, and 13. Goal 13 essentially is on climate action. If you also consider goal 6, which is also leading to related to environment, has a lot of alignment with other SDGs goals, including goal 13 and goals related to water, etc. So that's an alignment in terms of SDGs. In fact, the principles that were the genesis of this is national voluntary guidance guidelines. Essentially, is the essence of all the core principles of responsible business that is captured. So it definitely will have alignment with all the expectations in terms of SDG and UNGC's principles as well. If you see alignment, because what is expected now is once you have a framework in place, and what you're also required to do is you have to report compliance when it comes to compliance reporting. All the functions cannot take it lightly. So it's important to first align the principles. By and large, it aligns with few of the functions of the organization. When you consider principle 1 and information that is required to be reported in principle 1, 4, and 7, the information resting with company secretary, etc., is required. Systems IT is aligned with principle 9. Corporate governance, principle 1, 3, and 5. So then CSR and principle 8. Energy efficiency department or energy department, or maybe in some of the service sector company it is called the facility management group. So that can provide you most of the principal six data, essentially waste, water, energy, emission, all of that. Then you have a CSR team essentially for the social pillar. If you remember, principal 8 is on the social capital, social pillar. So CSR department will provide you information related to principal 8. Then human resource development will provide you information, some of the information under principal 1, under principal 5, because a lot of training, grievance redressal mechanism, and the actions taken, etc. All of those information will be resting with human resource department. Then finance, also a lot of financial information would be required. So principle 1, principle 2, principle 5, and principle 7, 8, 9. Similarly, legal, a lot of legal information in terms of penalty, some of the litigations, etc. All of that, would be required. Then under safety also, product safety and ensuring health and safety of people, etc. So principle 2 and 3. Health and medical also under principle 3 and principle 9, you'll get some information from health and medical team. Then environment, again, if you have a separate environment division, then information other than energy can be obtained from the environment division, depending on which kind of company you are and how your functions are in terms of getting this data. This alignment, I think, will be very, very important. Then material management, corporate planning, and production sales. So what we generally do, so we are also helping many companies to align with the reporting framework and start preparing for the report that is to be published next year. Is under each 9 principle, we have mapped which key KPI, and it is actually a very structured format when you see the BRSR framework in terms of reporting. And for each of the data points within a principle, we have defined which functions to kind of go to and ask for the report. Because within a principle, if you see, there are so many different departments are required to be touched based with. So it's very important to identify KPI wise which function to go to. And it comes and aggregated, and some department has to take the overall responsibility in terms of aggregating the information and then putting in the framework for the reporting. So that's the important aspect here. What is also important to note is BRSR framework also provides a guidance document. Because it's the first time compliance reporting, there'll be a lot of questions, confusion in terms of understanding, etc. is there. So a lot of guidance document is provided principle wise in the BRSR reporting framework. So in a way, how does company get prepared for such reporting is also important to understand. And so what's important is to also track. You do a gap assessment where you are in terms of the reporting and monitoring of those KPIs information, and not only quantitative, but some of the qualitative aspects in terms of policy. And if you've not, there are some policy gaps, you can start initiating policy formulation under all the 9 principles. Then doing a readiness assessment in terms of what controls, etc. need to be carried out, need to be established to ensure credible reporting, consistent reporting as per the framework. And once you design the matrix and identify which function to go to, then you circulate that and you get the information and put it into the frameworks that you have. Also, one of the expectations is to whether to go for third-party assurance or not. To get more credibility of your disclosure in the market, companies go for third-party assurance. So again, third-party assurance is both limited assurance and reasonable assurance. Reasonable is very, very, it requires a lot of rigor and goes to the detailed traceability of every KPI, while limited assurance is to the limited extent. So these are the options that are available with organizations generally in terms of getting third-party assured. We'll also go through some of the essential indicators that are not mandatory when we go through one of the case studies. But I'll quickly stop here and Mr. Rajesh, should we take the questions right away or once we go through the couple of case studies and then we ask for questions?
Maybe we'll take up the question in the end. We'll complete the case study because it will take hardly some, maybe 10 minutes more, 10 to 15 minutes more, and then we'll take all the questions. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. I think so. This is a report on BRSR for FY 21-22. And you can see here starts with a forward. And then, as I mentioned, the framework for reporting, section A is on general disclosure, section B on management and process disclosure, and section C is on principle-wise disclosure, right? So that's the table of content of the report. Section A, corporate identity number, CIN number of the company, name of the listed entity, year of incorporation, registered office address, corporate address, email, telephone, website, financial year for which this report has been prepared, name of the stock exchange where shares are listed, paid up capital. So all these elements on the left side is all part of the BRSR reporting framework. So these are the elements under which you have to report. Paid up capital, name of the contact, details in terms of queries, if it has to go to, then reporting boundary. Whether we are reporting. So if you see the expectation, it is for all listed companies, but in many cases, you will find that even the group companies are separately listed. So whether you want to do, report on a consolidated fashion, you are free to do that, as long as for each of the KPIs, you are reporting for the entire group. So it's a choice that companies have to exercise that way. Whether you're only focusing on that listed company or you're reporting for the entire group. So yeah, that's another takeaway here. Details of business activities in terms of products and services on a broad level. So the services is financial insurance service, and also turnover and split of the turnover based on the products and services. Then you have to define what your service is, what is your product on a high, on a broad level. The number of locations where plants and operations offices of the entity are situated, whether it's national, how many locations, how many offices, international, how many offices, markets served by the entity, national markets, number of states, international number of countries. What is the contribution of exports as a percentage of? So this is all part of section A of the disclosure. What is the contribution of export as a percentage of total turnover in the entity? A brief on types of customers. So you have to disclose information about your customers. In terms of employees also, you have to provide information related to permanent and other permanent employees under categories of male and female, and you have to also provide percentage and ratio of the same. Then number of disabled employee, differently abled employees, whether they are permanent and non-permanent. So that is something that needs to be reported here. Participation, inclusion, representation of women, board of directors, how many women there in the key management personnel, what is the representation in terms of percentage, turnover rate of for permanent employees and workers. So workers I mentioned could be termed as contractual workers. So permanent employees, the turnover rate is here 16%, 23% for female. Total is 18%, and you have to also provide information for the past 2 years as well. and so that a trend is seen by the investors in terms of how are you able to retain your talent. Then you have to provide information about your joint ventures, subsidiaries and associate companies, and percentage of shares held by the listed companies. You have to define here. Then you have to provide details of the CSR. What is the total turnover? What is the net worth? And what is the total CSR spend here? Then complaints and grievance on any of the principles 1 to 9. So number of complaints during the financial year, number of complaints that has pending resolution, you have to report that as well. Overview of entities, material responsible business conduct issues on. So you can see the issues that have been identified as material issue by this organization. The first is financial literacy. Then we have to also identify whether it's a risk or an opportunity. A issue can become material not only from a risk perspective, but also from an opportunity perspective, right? So positive and negative impacts, whether the issue has a positive and negative impact on the business and the stakeholders. Then rationale also you have to provide for identifying the risk and opportunity. In case of risk, approach to adapt mitigation measures, right? Financial implication of the risk or opportunity, positive and negative financial implication you have to kind of define. The second topic is on data security and customer privacy. Again, you have to define risk and opportunity and other parameters you have to follow. Then digitization is another material topic for the bank. Then climate change and governance, you see, it's become a material topic for most of the companies now. So section B. So there will be for reporting following these material topics, there will be many other KPIs or subtopics. So it's not that it's only 4, but there'll be other subtopics as well. Management process disclosure, right? So what is expected? So if you remember, I had mentioned that policy and management processes is required. So whether your entity's policies cover each principles and its core elements of NGBRC, right? National guidance for responsible business conduct. So if you analyze the disclosure expectation under each principle, this point here says that whether you have policy in place to cover each of the aspects under this principle, yes or no. Has the policy been approved by the board or it is at this draft stage? So that's you have to report here. Web link of the policies if available. So expectation is to disclose it in the public domain. Whether the entity has translated the policy into procedures. So what follows after policy is processes and procedure and also responsibilities. So you have to disclose that whether you have policies following those principles. Do the enlisted policies extend to your value chain partners? As I mentioned, that value chain partners has become very important. You have to go beyond your 4 walls. Name of the national and international code certification labels standards that is used. Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, for example, if you are procuring wood-based material, so there is a FSC is a global label that is there. In some of the notebooks or paper, you'll see FSC certified. That essentially shows that that paper or that furniture is sourced from a wood. It's coming from a wood which is sourced from a sustainably managed forest. So that is FSC, for example, they have given. Similarly, there are many other international codes and certification for different products you procure or different things that you get for your organizations. Like Rainforest Alliance is another one. Then some of the certifications like SA8000, OSAS, ISO, BIS. All of that is required. So principle-wise policy, see there in the top table, they're given yes, no. for each of the principles. Now here under principle 1, what are the policies that you have? You have to enlist this policy. What are the policies that you have under principle 2, product responsibility? You have to enlist there. What are the policies under principle 3, well-being of employees? What are the policies under principle 4? What are the policies under principle 5, and likewise? So what you have to do is enlist the policies that you have, whether in public domain or not, but you have to disclose. Then specific commitments, goals, and targets set by the entity with defined timeline. So under any of the areas under ESG, if you have certain specific goals and targets or strategies that you have set for your companies, so that you have to disclose. So many companies have started to have a carbon neutrality roadmap for their companies. By 2035, they'll become carbon neutral or net zero by 2050. If you have such of those, then you can definitely display it here, disclose it here. Sorry. Then performance of the entity against specific commitments, goals, and targets, along with reasons in case of the same are not met. Then on energy management, you can see the example upskilling, workforce diversity, digital environment. Then another point is on statement by director responsible for the business responsibility sustainability report. So statement from the director is expected. Details of the highest authority responsible for implementing and oversight of the business responsibility policies. So you have to assign responsibilities. That is also expected to be disclosed here. You can see here the managing director and chief executive officer is responsible for the overall implementation of the policy. Right. Then details of review of NGBRC by the company, who reviews it, how do you align with your policy with the NGBRC principles. All of that is required to be reviewed periodically within the organization. Has the entity carried out independent assessment evaluation of working of its policy by an external agency? If yes, no, then provide the name of the agency. That is also required. If the answer to any of the questions is no, provide reasons to be stated here. So in case your answer is no, then you have to provide reasons. Simply writing no is not. So writing no can solve temporary issue, but nonetheless, you have to have system in place, policies in place, so that your answer is next in the forthcoming years. Then section C is on actually reporting on the key KPIs under each of the 9 principles. I'll just quickly go through. Then under the first principle, a percentage covered by training and awareness program by any of the principles during the financial year. So percentage of people covered through those training under board of director level, under key management person level, employees other than key management professionals. So in its entirety, everything is covered. Then details of the fine, penalty, and punishment and settlement amount paid in proceedings with regulators and judicial institutions, not only regulators, but also judicial cases if you have, and if you have been asked to pay a settlement amount, that amount that needs to be disclosed here. There are other instances to disclose in question 2 above. Appeal, revision, all of that is required to be reported here. Then you have number of directors, KMPs, etc., against whom disciplinary action has been taken. So you have to disclose a lot of sensitive information now under this framework. Details of complaints regards to conflict of interest. Then details of corrective actions that has been taken. Leadership indicators in this principle, if you see, awareness program conducted for value chain partners. Again, value chain partners. So that's something a progressive company would like to do. Does the entity have processes in place to avoid managed conflict of interest involving members of the board? If yes, provide details of the processes to ensure avoidance of conflict of interest. Principle 2, percentage of R&D and capital expenditure. So that you have to provide here. Does the entity have procedures in place for sustainable sourcing? So you have to provide the processes. sustainable products, essentially. All of that needs to be, provided here. Whether extended producer responsibility specifically to the EPR regulation that is there on the waste, management. Against how many plastic e-waste and hazardous waste were reused, recycled, safely disposed for both the years is required here. Details of measures for well-being of employees, and this is under essential indicator under principle C. So well-being, how do you do that? Health insurance, life accident insurance, maternity benefits, paternity benefits, daycare facilities for male, female, permanent employees, non-permanent employees. So these are essential indicators. Details of retirement benefits for current and previous financial year. PF, gratuity, ECI, NPS, a number of percentage of employee covered, whether 100% or, some of the employees are excluded from these benefits, all of that will be required here. Then accessibility of workplaces for differently abled and marginalized groups, all of that is required to be reported here. Return of work and retention rates of permanent employees, right? Retention rate is there. Is there a mechanism available to receive and redress grievance for permanent employees and other permanent employees? And you have to provide details of the same if you have in terms of grievance redressal. Membership of employees and workers associations, unions recognized by the listed company. So that you have to report. Details of training given to employees on health safety measures, on skill upgradation. So very specific training expectation is there as far as this reporting is concerned. It's just not you provide this many percentage of employees with trade for this many hours. Under health and safety, under human rights, under skill upgradation, those level of training, those areas of training needs to be imparted now going forward. Details of performance and career development reviews of employees, male, female, that needs to be provided. Health and safety management system, information related to that. LTIFR, total recordable work injuries, number of fatalities, consequences, this needs to be provided. The number of complaints on the following made by employees and workers, filed on working conditions, on health and safety systems, that needs to be provided here. Under principle 4, if you see the quantitative one, list of stakeholder groups, as I mentioned, you have to also do a stakeholder assessment exercise. You have to list all the stakeholders. You have to see whether these stakeholder groups are identified as marginalized group or vulnerable group. Channels of communication that is there to interact with them, have a communication with them. Those kind of details is expected. Frequency of engagement, how often you interact with them. Purpose and scope of of the engagement, including key topics and concerns raised during those communication and engagement. So that is expected to be disclosed. And we have set of leadership indicators in terms of provide processes for consultation on those topics. So again, essential indicators in here is employees and workers who have been provided human rights training, issues and policy of the company, permanent, non-permanent employees, and to provide a ratio on that. Minimum wage paid to the employees and workers is required to be disclosed as well in this indicator. Number of complaints. Yeah. So, yeah. So this indicator is on total energy consumption that you have to provide, whether you are mandated under perform, achieve and trade, which is only there a compliance requirement for reduction of emission energy intensity for high energy consuming industries like iron, steel, cement, etc. So if you are there, then you have to report under this indicator. Then greenhouse gas emissions. So all the environment related indicators is expected to be reported here. Is scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions. Uh, Under each categories of the gases, we have 7 greenhouse gas. So you have to report on those aspects as well. On energy, water, waste, all these indicators are provided here. Similarly, on principle 7, you have a number of affiliation trade industry associations that needs to be reported. List of top 10 trade industry and chambers associations, the entity is affiliated to on a national level and a state level, that is expected to be reported here. Principle 9 on describe the mechanism in place to receive and respond to consumer complaints and feedback. What are your mechanisms? What are your processes? That needs to be reported here. Turnover of products and services as a percentage of turnover of all products and services that carry information about environment and social parameters. Safe, responsible usage, recycling and safe. For example, you have a different set of products, which all products contain these kind of information of all the total products. So the expectation is that all the products should have this labeling. So that's the reason why they are asking this information. Number of consumer complaints in respect to the following: data privacy, advertising, cybersecurity, delivery of essential services, restrictive trade practices, unfair trade practices. Details of instance of products recalls on account of safety measures. If you're a product-based company, then this information is very critical. Yeah, and there's some of the leadership indicators in terms of channels, platforms where information of products and services is obtained, is available, steps taken to inform and educate consumers about safe and responsible usage of products and services. So that disclosure on the those information related to products and services is the expectation. I'll stop here, and I think we'll take a few questions.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Abhinav. In fact, it was a very detailed one, quite pertinent, and of course, very informative session overall. So thank you for taking us through the various aspects. In fact, and we could see like 9 principles. What we based on, in fact, the BRSR reporting is there. It's quite important for all the companies. In fact, to understand where all they have to focus and how this ESG, the aspects will be supporting them to strengthen their overall performance of the company, in fact, and of course to achieve sustainability. Before, in fact, we have some questions in chat box. Before we proceed, I just would like to understand from you, Mr. Abhinav, like what do you suggest, like for those companies who have never started like this sort of activities, they have never done any sustainability reporting also in the past or the BRR, and of course they are not falling under those 1,000 companies list what the SEBI is expecting for them to report. So what do what is your suggestion for them, how to start the journey of this kind of adopting this framework, in fact? So maybe your view on this, I would like to hear, or in fact we all would like to hear on that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very important question. Because if you remember in the first few 5-10 minutes, I'd mentioned that the ambition of SEBI is to extend it to all listed companies. They have already made it voluntary to the non-listed companies as well. Now, why should non-listed companies should start disclosing and having system in place to report non-financial indicators? That it is not only required from a compliance perspective, but also to demonstrate your responsibility towards environment and social pillars to the stakeholders, whoever your stakeholders are. In fact, if you're providing services and products to any company outside India, especially the European countries, they definitely would require you to disclose your ESG information using any of the globally accepted frameworks. So it's when you start on the reporting journey, even if you're a relatively smaller company, you tend to see what are the key areas that are important, that is not getting enough attention of the management. So the starting point for all companies, big or small, is at least try to do a materiality assessment. What are your peers doing the national peers in the same sector that you are in and the global players, what are they reporting on? What are the key focus areas that they have? Have a laundry list of those. And then map these and take feedback from your own internal different functions and see how important they consider that these issues are. That will give you a prioritization of these topics. And slowly you analyze each topic and then see what are the key elements that I need to report on. You can take help from any of the globally accepted frameworks. Like GRI is a very comprehensive, it's like a Granth. It's become a standard, right? So, and it has evolved over the past 20, 25 years. So do that materiality assessment, I would say. Do stakeholder engagement, at least internal stakeholder engagement. And then use one of the frameworks and then start. The frameworks will help you define your KPI, the way it should be defined and the way you should be asking your data owners for those kind of information. Start small, it's a journey, and then start also developing some strategies, some goals, some targets about important material issues that you have identified. I think that would be a good approach.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Avinav, for your for sharing your thoughts. In fact, so we have some questions in chat box. I'll just quickly take those also. So we have a question from Mr. Vimal from ABB. In fact, like he's talking about. Of course, you have been supporting various companies, in fact, Mr. Abhinav. So the question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge faced by any company while preparing as well as reporting the BRSR?
So the framework that is there, many companies already have many of the data. The only challenge which I see, some of the relatively more sensitive data that is now expected. So companies are a little concerned about sharing those. And sometimes company also find a little bit of ambiguity in terms of the way they are recording that related data and the way it is asked in the format. So there's a little bit of concern there in terms of the way we are reporting. Shall we send the same data under that table or not? So that's something that companies are facing. The other thing is it's a good revelation for companies to see that I'm a established company, I'm operating for so many years, but there are still policy gaps as far as ESG policies expectations is concerned. So it's a revelation for many companies. So every company is starting also with a policy gap assessment. So unless you have a policy in place, you will not have a processes and systems to track and monitor the performance. So if you want to enhance your performance on a particular thing, first thing you need to have a policy. So policy gap assessment is a key initial step also. So yeah, those are few challenges that I see, and sensitive information that they consider needs to be reported is something. Yeah.
Very true, very true. In fact, some of the areas companies are quite reluctant also considering the sensitivity of the some of the information they have, right? So let us move to the next question. We have a question from Shweta, Indo MIM Private Limited. Of course, the question is, of course, is there any organization certifying for the sustainability? So I think, uh, can you just put the very clear question, because certification of sustainability means like you're talking about the kind of for the individual E, S, and G. In fact, we have certain certifications. So maybe those aspects, maybe Mr. Abhinav, if you'd like to throw some light, like maybe in different areas, any certifications are available, or maybe any assurance also you mentioned, like the once we report our BRSR, the data has to be quite, uh, to the point, very accurate. In fact, then accuracy has to be verified, and then only it should be put in the public domain. In fact, right? So maybe some of the certifications which are available in the market, and of course the assurance also, some of the ISO standards which are there. Maybe you can mention a little bit, and which will be helpful for our audience also. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good question actually. So if you see certification, we have seen that organizations do get certification in terms of ISO for their ISO 14000, and then EHS. And also for some of the social standards that are available, say 8,000, 26,000 certification. Then you also have some of the certification done and expected from some of the European companies. EcoVadis is one that, for a supplier's sustainability assessment. So that's kind of a certification can be obtained. Under environment, you have a lot of certification specifically related to greenhouse gas emission, which is one of the most important KPI under the entire ESG scheme of things, especially in the environment pillar, because of the times that we are in terms of climate change. So ISO 14064, I think, is the standard that is used for reporting, and also it has one of the levels for verification, doing the verification certification. Then there are assurance standards that I mentioned that are used. Third party will give you a certificate. We call it assurance statement, that we have gone through the data is correct, etc. Processes are in place, and we did not find any material misstatement. This is what you get from an assurance statement. Similarly, for an entire sustainability report, if you want to get it third party assured, again, you use the same assurance standard and you get an attestation also. So for specific KPIs, there are attestation or certification available, and the entire report on the whole, you can get it done.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Abhinav, for answering. I think almost all the questions you have answered, and I think thanks to everyone. But really must appreciate Mr. Abhinav. The BRSR is really a very vast topic, like, and you have completed, of course, and presented in a very nice way within our time. And of course, we could also complete the entire Q&A session within time. I think we don't have any other questions in chat box. Maybe if you have any other queries, like from audience side, you can reach out to us or reach out to Mr. Abhinav also, who would be, of course, be happy to support you in this particular journey. And of course, though the BRSR reporting is not a compliance, just a compliance matter for all of us, but it's like something that which will be, of course, improving our ESG performance overall by addressing the non-financial aspects. And of course, it will also be having a very clear approach, kind of 360-degree approach, in fact, to make any company a quite sustainable one. So with this note, I would really again thank you all for your participation, and maybe I request Ms. Rupa for the vote of thanks. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Mr. Abhinav. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Over to you. Yeah.
Mr. Vishwas, would you like to say a few words, sir?
No, Mrs. Rupa, you can carry on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Avinav Prasad, for that exhaustive presentation. And we look forward to have many more similar programs with you in the future, sir. Thank you very much, and thanks all the participants for joining this session.
Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Much.